The Gospel of Thomas records Jesus saying something the church has spent 17 centuries trying to erase. Seek and do not stop seeking until you find, and when you find, you will be disturbed, and when you are disturbed, you will marvel, and you will reign over all. This isn't the soft, comforting Jesus of Sunday sermons. This is Jesus as initiator into mysteries, warning that true seeking doesn't lead to peace. It leads to a complete shattering of everything you thought was real. The ancient text, buried in the Egyptian desert since the 4th century and only rediscovered in 1945, preserves a radically different teaching. That the kingdom of God isn't somewhere you go when you die, but a state of consciousness you access when you finally stop accepting the lies you've been fed about reality. The church knew that if people understood what Jesus actually meant by seeking, they would never again be satisfied with ritual, doctrine, or the authority of priests. They would become dangerous, awakened souls who could no longer be controlled. Have you felt it? That relentless inner pull to seek something you can't even name, that refuses to let you settle for comfortable explanations? Drop a comment if you've ever felt like the seeking itself was the only thing keeping you alive. When Jesus told his disciples to seek until they find, he wasn't talking about searching for answers in Scripture or finding God in a church building. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the earliest collections of Jesus' sayings that the church systematically suppressed, reveals that Jesus was teaching something far more subversive, that truth is not given to you by external authorities, but discovered through direct inner experience that will fundamentally disturb everything you believe about yourself and reality. The saying appears in the opening passages of Thomas, and it follows a precise spiritual sequence that mystics throughout history have recognized as the authentic path of gnosis, direct knowing that bypasses belief systems entirely. Jesus says first that you must seek, not casually wonder, not occasionally question, but seek with the totality of your being. This isn't intellectual curiosity. This is the desperate hunger of a soul that knows something is profoundly wrong with the reality it's been told to accept. Ancient texts preserved by those who refuse to let this knowledge die describe seeking as the first stage of spiritual awakening. It begins when you can no longer ignore the contradictions, when the explanations you've been given stop making sense, when you look around at the world and recognize that what you've been taught about God, purpose, and reality doesn't match what you're actually experiencing. The seeking begins when you stop trusting external validation and start trusting the voice inside that whispers, "There's more, and you're not being told the truth." But here's what the institutional church could never allow people to understand. Jesus didn't say, "Seek and you will find peace." He said, "When you find, you will be disturbed." This is the part that got edited out of acceptable Christianity, because disturbed people don't make obedient congregants. Disturbed people question everything. They tear down false structures. They refuse to go back to sleep once they've seen what's really happening. The disturbance Jesus speaks of isn't psychological dysfunction. It's the shattering that occurs when you discover that the fundamental assumptions you've built your life upon are illusions. When you find what you're seeking, when you access direct knowing, when you touch the reality behind the veil, it destroys your ability to participate in the comfortable lies that keep society functioning smoothly. You become disturbed because you can see what others can't. That most of human life is the elaborate performance designed to keep souls distracted from their true nature and purpose. Mystics who entered deep states of altered consciousness and accessed records beyond ordinary perception confirmed that this disturbance is necessary. You cannot enter higher awareness while still clinging to the false security of beliefs that were never yours to begin with. The disturbance strips away everything inauthentic. It's the spiritual equivalent of having your entire operating system deleted. Terrifying, but absolutely necessary for what comes next. The Gospel of Thomas records Jesus teaching that after the disturbance comes marvel. Once you've been shaken to your core, once everything false has collapsed, you enter a state of wonder that has nothing to do with childish amazement. This marvel is the direct experience of reality as it actually is, infinite, conscious, alive, and utterly beyond anything the imprisoned mind could imagine. You marvel because you finally see what you've always been, what you've always had access to, what was never separate from you even for a moment. This progression, seek, find, be disturbed, marvel, leads to the final stage that the church could absolutely never permit to be widely understood. You will reign over all, not reign in some future afterlife, but reign now. This is the promise of gnosis, that when you complete the journey of seeking, when you survive the disturbance and enter the marvel, you step into your authority as a conscious being who is no longer subject to the forces that control the unawakened. Ancient scriptures that the early church buried describe this reign as the recovery of your true status. Before incarnation, before the descent into matter and forgetting, you existed in a state of knowing and power. The seeking is the journey back to that original condition. Those who complete it are no longer slaves to the systems, religious, social, economic, psychological, that keep humanity docile and manageable. They reign because they remember what they are, and nothing in the material dimension has authority over that. The reason the Gospel of Thomas was suppressed, the reason it was hidden in a jar and buried in the Egyptian desert, is precisely because it contains this teaching. If people understood what Jesus actually meant by seeking until you find, organized religion would lose its power immediately. You don't need priests when you have direct access. You don't need doctrine when you have gnosis. You don't need the church's approval when you're reigning over the very forces that the church claimed to protect you from. Consider what seeking actually requires of you. It demands that you question everything you were taught by parents, teachers, religious authorities, and cultural narratives. It demands that you be willing to lose every certainty, every comfortable belief, every identity you constructed to fit in and be accepted. The church offers you the opposite. Believe what we tell you, accept our interpretation, trust our authority, and you'll be saved. Jesus in Thomas offers you disturbance, upheaval, the complete destruction of your false self, and then marvel and reign. This is why so few complete the journey. Most people start seeking when life forces them to, when suffering becomes unbearable, when loss strips away their illusions, when they can no longer deny that something is fundamentally wrong. They seek desperately for a while, hungry for truth. But when they get close to finding, when they start to feel the tremors of the coming disturbance, they retreat. They go back to comfortable beliefs. They accept partial answers. They settle for explanations that let them keep their identity intact. The chosen ones are the ones who don't stop when the disturbance begins. They're the ones who keep seeking even when finding starts to destroy everything they thought they knew. They understand instinctively that you cannot add truth to a false foundation. The entire structure must collapse. They welcome the disturbance because they recognize it as the birth pangs of their true self, emerging from the prison of conditioned consciousness. Ancient wisdom preserved across centuries by those who could see beyond ordinary perception reveals that there are specific signs that you're approaching the stage of finding. Your old explanations stop working. You can't go back to believing things just because authority figures tell you to. You start seeing through the performance that others are still immersed in. You feel increasingly alienated from the consensus reality, not because you're broken, but because you're waking up to how profoundly limited and false that consensus is. When you find, when you touch that direct knowing that Jesus was pointing toward, the disturbance is immediate and total. Every relationship based on false pretenses becomes unbearable. Every career built on compromising your soul becomes impossible to continue. Every belief system you used as a security blanket reveals itself as a cage. This is not a comfortable process. This is why Jesus didn't promise peace to those who seek. He promised disturbance, because that's what actually happens when you stop accepting lies. But here's what makes this worthwhile. What makes the disturbance not just bearable, but necessary. The marvel that follows is worth everything you lose. When you've been stripped of every false identity, when every illusion has collapsed, when you're standing naked in the ruins of who you thought you were, that's when you finally see what you actually are. Not a limited body stumbling through a hostile universe, not a sinner dependent on external salvation, not a powerless victim of forces beyond your control. You're an expression of infinite consciousness that temporarily forgot its nature, and seeking until you find is the process of remembering. The reign Jesus speaks of is not domination over others. It's sovereignty over your own consciousness. It's the recovery of your authority to choose your reality, to refuse manipulation, to see through deception, to access knowing that doesn't depend on external sources. When you reign, the archons, those forces that feed on unconsciousness and fear, lose their power over you. They can only control what they can keep asleep. Once you've sought until you found, once you've survived the disturbance and entered the marvel, you're operating on a frequency they can't touch. If this knowledge resonates with something deep inside you, hit that like button. It tells me you're ready for more truth that the mainstream spiritual marketplace doesn't want you to have. Subscribe, because those who are meant to find this channel will find it when their seeking intensifies. The algorithm mysteriously serves the awakening in its own way. The church created an entire theology designed to prevent people from seeking the way Jesus taught. They replaced direct knowing with belief. They replaced the disturbance with comfort. They replaced reigning over all with submission to religious authority. They took Jesus' instructions for achieving gnosis and transformed them into reasons to stop seeking and accept what you're told. This is why the Gospel of Thomas had to be suppressed. It couldn't be edited into submission. It preserved the raw teaching in a form that couldn't be reconciled with institutional control. Consider what your life would look like if you actually followed Jesus' instruction. Not the sanitized, church-approved version of faith, but the actual practice of seeking until you find. You would question everything. You would be willing to lose everything. You would walk directly into the disturbance instead of avoiding it. You would choose truth over comfort, knowing over belief, direct experience over inherited doctrine. You would become ungovernable by any external authority because you would have accessed the authority of your own awakened consciousness. This is what the chosen ones do. They seek because they can't not seek. The hunger for truth is stronger than their need for security. When others tell them to stop asking questions, to just have faith, to trust the authorities, something in them refuses. They keep seeking even when seeking costs them relationships, careers, social acceptance. They understand that finding the truth is worth any price because living in lies is unbearable once you've glimpsed that there's an alternative. The disturbance Jesus warns about is already beginning in your life if you're being pulled to this information. You're feeling the cracks in your belief system. You're noticing contradictions that don't add up. You're experiencing a growing dissatisfaction with answers that used to satisfy you. This is the seeking beginning to find. Don't run from the disturbance. Don't try to repair the cracks with new beliefs. Let everything that's false collapse completely. The marvel is on the other side of that destruction. When you marvel, when you experience the direct knowing that comes from completed seeking, you understand why the journey was necessary. You understand why the disturbance had to happen. You understand why comfortable lies are more dangerous than uncomfortable truths. The marvel is not an emotional high. It's the clear, unshakable recognition of what is, unfiltered by belief systems, undistorted by conditioned perception. It's seeing reality as it actually is, and recognizing yourself as an inseparable aspect of that reality. And then comes the reign. Not power over others, but power over the illusions that kept you enslaved. Not domination of external circumstances, but mastery of your own consciousness. Not control of matter, but freedom from being controlled by material conditions. You reign because you've recovered your original authority. The authority you had before you descended into forgetting. Before you accepted the limitations of the identity you were assigned. Before you believed the lie that you were powerless and needed external salvation. The Gospel of Thomas preserves this teaching because some people in the early centuries refused to let it die. They knew that institutional Christianity would bury it. They knew that the church would replace seeking with submission, disturbance with comfort, marvel with ritual, and reign with obedience. So they wrote it down, put it in a jar, and buried it in the desert, trusting that when the time was right, when enough souls were ready to seek until they found, these texts would resurface. That time is now. You're being called to seek. Not casually, not as a hobby, not as spiritual entertainment. You're being called to seek until you find, knowing that finding will disturb everything, trusting that the marvel and the reign are worth the price. This is not a comfortable path. This is not the path of Sunday sermons and feel-good spirituality. This is the path Jesus actually taught before his words were edited into tools of control. This is the path for those who would rather be disturbed by truth than comforted by lies. Like this video, if you're one of the ones who can't stop seeking, even when seeking threatens everything you've built your life upon, subscribe to continue receiving these transmissions that the mainstream spiritual world doesn't want widely distributed. Comment below with "I seek" if your soul recognized this teaching as something you've always known but had forgotten. Let's build a community of those who are willing to be disturbed, who are hungry for marvel, who are ready to reign. Are you living the life your soul intended before you descended into this dimension? Or are you performing the role you were assigned by forces that benefit from your unconsciousness? Jesus didn't give you permission to stop seeking once you found a comfortable belief system. He told you to seek until you find the actual truth, and he warned you that finding it would destroy your false peace. The question is, are you brave enough to keep seeking? Are you willing to be disturbed? Can you trust that the marvel and the rain are real, even when everyone around you is settled into comfortable illusions? You know what you need to do. Your soul has been whispering it to you every time you felt that pull towards something beyond the ordinary, something real, something that matters. The seeking is the path. The disturbance is the initiation. The marvel is the awakening. The rain is your birthright, recovered through the courage to never stop seeking until you find what you came here to remember.